most fascinating aspects of this book, which is very entertaining, and the main focus, I think, are the characters, the people. But there's a context in which these characters, operated. And what's very clear to me is that, how closely related the history of Punjab was with the history of Afghanistan and Afghans in this period. And also how closely interlinked the histories were of Punjab and Kashmir. And, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about how this actually, played out. There were at least 9 invasions of Ahmad Shah Abdali into Punjab. We tend to remember only the famous one of 1761, but also the Dogras had a very complicated relationship with the Sikh kingdom of Ranjit Singh. And we all know that ultimately, by helping the British, they were able, through the Treaty of Amritsar of 1846, to acquire the Vale of Kashmir. They had until then just been the lords of Jammu. But perhaps you can, through characters such as Ahmad Shah Abdali or Gulab Singh Dogra or his brother, who was a Vizier of Ranjit Singh, tell us how, in fact, Punjab's history in this period is so interconnected with the history of Afghanistan and Kashmir.
First, I have to thank you for your very insightful observations and comments. What you articulated is exactly what I was hoping to portray through the sections about the Afghans and the Sikhs. So, as Dr. Bose shared, after Nader Shah's invasion of Delhi in 1739, the landscape of the Punjab changed very dramatically. And it's important to put this in context, given what would happen in the next 60 years and culminate in the formation of the Sikh Empire. So, Sikhism was still a relatively new faith. So, it had only been a few decades since the passing of the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, which had been followed by a very robust military campaign by one of his lieutenants, Banda Singh Bahadur, who marched all the way from the Deccan to Punjab and brought some of the perpetrators who had exhibited tremendous cruelty towards the Sikhs to justice, only to fall very quickly at the hands of the Mughals and be tortured and killed. It was a very difficult time for the Sikhs. Lahore was, of course, part of the Mughal Empire and was ruled by successive governors. Right around that time, in the 1730s, the governor of Lahore was a fellow by the name of Zakaria Khan, who was a very able administrator. And at various times, he tried to reach out to the Sikhs. He wanted to pacify them, because the Sikhs had developed into a fractious lot. They would often be jockeying for power and territory, and they were slowly starting to flex their muscles. So Zakaria Khan made several attempts to co-opt the Sikhs, if you will, by offering them jagirs and so on and so forth, but decided at one point that the Sikhs were absolutely intractable, and the only way to deal with them was to get rid of them. So Zakaria Khan put a price on every Sikh's head. Right around the time of Nader Shah's invasion, if you brought a Sikh in, dead or alive, you would be paid a handsome bounty. That was the condition of the Sikhs at that point in time. It's mind-boggling to imagine that 60 years later, they would become the overlords of that entire region. And that's one of the most interesting stories that this book tells. Only in part, though, because that history is so rich that a work like this cannot possibly do it justice. One of my objectives in writing this, of course, is to pique the reader's interest to go and seek more, along those lines. So what happened in the next several years was the Persian attack had broken the back of the Mughal Empire. The status of the Punjab was somewhat open to question. It was de facto still a part of the Mughal Empire, which was now weak. And Ahmad Shah Durrani, or Abdali, absolutely believed that it was part of his dominion because it had been ceded to him according to him. Maintaining control of that dominion was a different matter, however. So the Sikhs started slowly growing in power. The Sikhs had very strong republican sentiments. Any Sikh who had a horse and a sword was a chief. No less than any other chief in the land. Bowing to somebody else was absolutely out of the question. So slowly, they started aggregating them into bands, which developed into little fiefdoms. And the term used to define these fiefdoms was the missals. So at the time of Ranjit Singh's rise, Punjab was under the de facto control of 12 of these missals. All of them had chiefs who were larger than life. They were all warriors. That's how they became chiefs. Nobody inherited anything. It was through their horse and sword that they established power. Some of these fiefdoms are very small. Some of them were large and powerful. They were constantly at odds with each other, jockeying for territory, for plunder. Yes, it's perhaps not polite to talk about that, but that's what soldiers did in those days. That was the imperative for warfare, plunder. So they would relentlessly fight against each other and jockey against each other. But the minute an external threat appeared, they would all come together and fight as a unit. That is what directly gave rise to the empire of Ranjit Singhs. Ranjit Singh himself came from the Shukarchakia fiefdom or missal, which was one of the weakest and the smallest. And through an extremely interesting set of circumstances, fueled in no small part by the ambitions as well as the talents of his mother-in-law, who was the wife of the chief of one of the other missals called the Kanhaiya missal, which is very powerful. Ranjit Singh came into prominence as a result of Afghan attacks. So there was a direct relationship. Ahmad Shah Abdali had passed. I will mention in passing that through all his invasions of India, Ahmad Shah Abdali marched in with impunity, with nobody to challenge him. Who would challenge him? The Mughal Empire really didn't exist and certainly didn't exercise control in the Punjab. All the local chiefs would at various times ally themselves with him in order to first of all escape and then perhaps to benefit. The Sikhs, however, would relentlessly harry the Afghans every time they went back. So when they retreated, the Afghans would be laden with all the plunder that they had taken and with many, many captives, particularly young men and young women that they would enslave and try to take back. Those were the times when roving bands of Sikhs, which were essentially the various missals, would fall upon the Afghans in the dead of night while they were retreating, relieve them of their plunder, free their captives, take them home. Every campaign that Abdali mounted in the Punjab, he was subjected to this harassment by the Sikhs when he tried to return. At one point, he decided that enough was enough, and like Zakaria Khan 20 years before him, just resolved that the only way to deal with the Sikhs was to destroy them. In one instance, in one horrific massacre, which in Sikh history is known as the Vadaka Lukara, or the Great Holocaust, Ahmad Shah Abdali decimated tens of thousands of Sikhs, men, women, and children, by various estimates, close to 30 to 40% of the entire Sikh population was decimated in that one attack by Ahmad Shah Abdali, which happened in the 1760s. Given what the situation was in 1739, and given what the situation was in the 1760s, it seems so strange that just 40 years later, these people who were outlawed, set upon, relentlessly attacked, would establish an empire. And that directly came from the strength that had been built into the various missiles, and the fact that Ranjit Singh, through a very interesting combination of alliances and also in some cases battles, managed to combine all of these missiles and establish himself as the emperor. And of course, that was to have many, many far-reaching consequences in the further decades.